Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's tale begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. I was in college at the time, sitting in what I expected to be a fairly dry ethics class. The kind where you talk about hypotheticals, moral frameworks, case studies that feel distant and abstract. One day, our professor told us we'd have a guest speaker, a firefighter. He said it would be relevant to the course, but he didn't really explain how. Most of us assumed it would be about decision-making under pressure or public service or something along those lines. None of us were prepared for what he actually told us. The firefighter was older, not dramatic in the way you might expect from someone telling a tragic story. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't embellish. He spoke calmly, almost clinically at times, which somehow made everything he said hit harder. You could tell this was a story he had told before, not because it had become easier, but because it had settled into him in a way that never really leaves. He started by explaining the background, a family-owned septic and the wastewater company. Small operation. Not a big corporation cutting corners on a massive scale, just a family business that had been running for years. The kind of company where everyone knows each other, where work and family are completely intertwined. The father ran it. His sons worked with him. They did the dirty jobs most people don't want to think about, let alone do. On this particular day, they were working on a septic tank. Routine maintenance, nothing out of the ordinary. These tanks are dangerous, but when you've been around them long enough, familiarity can breed a false sense of safety. The firefighter explained that there are gases involved. Hydrogen sulfide among them that can knock a person unconscious almost instantly. You don't get a warning. You don't get time to realize something is wrong. One breath can be enough. The youngest brother went in first. There was a leak in a hose, something small, something that probably didn't seem urgent or obvious at the time. He didn't realize the danger until it was too late. He passed out inside the tank. From the outside, it didn't look dramatic. There was no explosion, no screaming, just silence. The oldest brother noticed something was wrong when his younger brother didn't respond. He did what most people would do without thinking. He went in to pull him out. He passed out too. Then the second brother realized something was seriously wrong. Two people not responding. Panic sets in. Logic disappears. He went in after them. No, he passed out. At this point, the father knew something was terribly wrong. His sons weren't coming back out. He didn't have protective gear that would have saved him. He didn't stop to think about gas levels or oxygen or protocol. He saw his children in danger. He went in. He passed out as well. 4 people, all unconscious, all overcome by the same invisible threat, stacked one after another in a space that was never meant to be entered without proper equipment. By the time emergency services were called, it was already too late. The firefighter telling us this story was part of the team that responded. He described arriving on scene and realizing immediately what they were dealing with. This wasn't a rescue, it was a recovery. There was nothing they could do to save them. He talked about the difficulty of retrieving the bodies, about how they weren't equipped to just go in and pull people out the way everyone imagines, about the careful, methodical process required to avoid adding more bodies to the count, about the weight of what they were pulling out. not just physically, but emotionally. And then he talked about the mother. She wasn't there when it happened. She arrived later. She arrived to find her entire family gone. Her husband, her sons, her life, erased in the span of minutes. The firefighter didn't linger on her reaction in a sensational way. He didn't need to. He simply said that people tried to comfort her, but there was nothing anyone could say. There is no comfort for someone who loses everyone all at once. Not to illness, not to an accident that takes one person at a time, but all of them, in one day, in one place. He said the thing that haunted him most was knowing how preventable it was. The equipment they needed existed. The gear that could have saved them was standard. It wasn't some cutting-edge technology. It was something they should have replaced, but didn't. Maybe it was expensive. Maybe they thought they could get by a little longer. Maybe nothing bad had ever happened before, so it felt safe enough. That decision, that one delay, cost an entire family their lives. He talked about how often this kind of thing happens. Not just in septic work, but in all kinds of industries. People get comfortable, they cut corners, they tell themselves it'll be fine this time. And most of the time it is, until it isn't. Sitting there in that classroom, listening to him describe pulling 4 bodies out of a tank while their wife and mother stood there watching, something shifted in me. It wasn't abstract anymore. Ethics wasn't about thought experiments or philosophical debates. It was about real people making small decisions that ripple outward in ways they can't undo. What stuck with me most wasn't just the horror of how they died. It was the chain reaction. One person goes down and love takes over. Instinct takes over. Family loyalty overrides logic. Each person who went in wasn't being reckless in their own mind. They were trying to save someone they loved. That's what made it so devastating. By the end of his talk, the room was completely silent. No one was checking their phones. No one was whispering. A few people were crying quietly. The firefighter didn't ask for applause. He just nodded to the professor and left. I still think about that story more often than I'd like. About how danger doesn't always announce itself. About how invisible threats can be more deadly than obvious ones. About how quickly a normal workday can turn into something irreversible. And I think about that mother standing there, watching strangers retrieve the bodies of her entire family, knowing that a piece of equipment, a decision made weeks or months earlier, might have changed everything. It's one of those stories that doesn't fade. It doesn't shock you in a loud way. It just settles into you, heavy and quiet, and stays there. This will probably get buried, and I don't know if it's the kind of story people expect when they ask for something creepy or disturbing. But it's one of those experiences that lodged itself in my chest and never really left. There's nothing supernatural about it. No jump scare, no twist ending. Just the slow, awful realization of how close violence can be, how quietly it can exist right next to ordinary life, and how much you can miss even when you're paying attention. I work in emergency communications. It's a job that teaches you very quickly how to compartmentalize. You learn how to take calls from people on the worst day of their lives, stay calm, gather information, and move on to the next call. You hear terrible things, but most of the time they stay on the other side of the phone. You don't see the blood. You don't smell the smoke. You don't feel the weight of it physically. You hang up, document, and keep going. That day was different. I came into work right after a double murder-suicide. A man had killed his wife and his adult daughter, then taken his own life. The details were still coming in when I arrived. There was that strange, heavy energy in the room that only shows up after something truly bad has happened. People were quieter than usual, movements more deliberate, voices lower. You could feel it before anyone even said anything. One of my co-workers was visibly shaken. He wasn't new. He wasn't inexperienced. He'd handled plenty of awful calls before, but this one had gotten to him in a way that was obvious the moment you looked at him. He kept glancing down at himself, tugging at his sleeves, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Eventually, someone asked him what was wrong. He said he had blood on him. He explained that he'd tried to help the daughter. He'd been there in the immediate aftermath, close enough to get her blood on his clothes. He hadn't had time to go home and change before his shift, and there was no spare uniform available. So he was sitting there, answering emergency calls, wearing clothes that still had her blood on them. That alone was horrifying. The idea of carrying that physical reminder of someone's last moments while continuing to do your job, listening to other people's emergencies, pretending everything was normal. It made my stomach turn, and I remember thinking how unfair it was that he had to carry that with him for the rest of the day. At the time, the victims were just names. A wife, a daughter. Tragic, but still abstract in that way that tragedies often are when they haven't connected themselves to your personal life yet. I felt sad, of course, angry, numb in that familiar professional way. I did my shift, handled my calls, and tried not to think too hard about the details. It wasn't until the end of my shift that everything shifted. I found out the daughter was my husband's friend and co-worker. The words didn't register at first. It took a moment for my brain to catch up, to align the name I'd heard earlier with an actual person. Then it hit me all at once. I had met her. Not many times. Just once. But I remembered her immediately. A few weeks before all of this, I had been hanging out with my husband and some of his co-workers. She was there that night. We weren't close. We didn't exchange numbers or make plans to see each other again. But she was kind, warm, the kind of person who makes an effort to include someone new without making it obvious or awkward. I remember talking to her for a bit. Just casual conversation. At some point, she mentioned that she had moved back home to help her mom. She said it in such a normal, offhand way that I didn't think much of it. I assumed her mom was sick, or maybe had mobility issues, or needed help around the house. That's usually what people mean when they say something like that. It didn't raise any red flags for me at the time. Looking back, that assumption haunts me, because now I realize she didn't mean help her mom with an illness or aging. She meant help her mom survive her dad. She didn't spell it out. She didn't complain. She didn't say anything overtly alarming. But there were hints, subtle ones that only make sense in hindsight. The way she spoke carefully. The way she seemed alert to emotional undercurrents in the room. The way she watched interactions more than she participated in them. There was one moment that night that stands out to me now in a way it didn't then. My husband and I were fighting at the time. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just one of those quiet, tense periods where everything feels brittle. At some point that evening, we had a brief interaction about his drinking. It wasn't a blow-up, just a few words exchanged, tight voices, a pause that lingered a little too long. No one else noticed. No one else reacted. Except her. She clocked it immediately. I saw it in her face. A flicker of recognition. Not judgment, not gossip, just understanding. Like she had seen that exact dynamic before and knew exactly what it meant. After that, she made a point of including me more, sitting closer, looping me into conversations, making small jokes, asking me questions, trying gently and quietly, to make me feel better. At the time, I thought she was just perceptive, empathetic, the kind of person who picks up on vibes and wants everyone to feel okay. I remember thinking that her home life must be a little dysfunctional for her to be so attuned to that kind of tension. But I had no idea how bad it really was. Finding out what happened reframed that entire evening in a way that made my chest ache. She wasn't just sensitive. She was experienced. She had lived in a house where tension wasn't just uncomfortable, but dangerous. Where reading a room wasn't a personality trait, but a survival skill. She had moved back home not because she wanted to, but because she felt she had to, because she was trying to protect her mother, because she saw something coming, even if she couldn't name it or stop it. And it still wasn't enough. That's the part that really gets me. She did what so many adult children do in abusive households. She went back. She tried to help. She tried to buffer, to mediate, to absorb some of the damage so her mother wouldn't have to take it all. She put herself back in harm's way out of love and responsibility and hoped that maybe this time things would be different. And it cost her her life. I think about the fact that I was hanging out with her just weeks before she died, sitting in the same room, laughing at the same jokes, complaining about normal, everyday things. I think about how close she was to the end of her life and how none of us knew, how she still showed up to work, still socialized, still tried to be kind to strangers like me. I think about my coworker, sitting at his desk with her blood on his clothes, answering calls like nothing was wrong. I think about how many people were connected to her in small, invisible ways, and how all of us carried a piece of that day without realizing it at first. There's something uniquely disturbing about violence that happens inside a family. Not because it's rarer, but because it's so often invisible until it's too late. From the outside, it looks like stress, like tension, like someone moving back home to help out, like a daughter who's a little too good at reading the room. And then suddenly it's a headline, a police report, a shift change conversation. I don't think of her as a victim in the abstract sense. I think of her as the woman who noticed I was unhappy and tried to make me smile. The woman who picked up on a subtle interaction that no one else saw. The woman who carried more than she should have had to, right up until the end. I also think about how easy it is to underestimate danger when it's familiar. How often we tell ourselves that things are bad, but not that bad. That someone's difficult, but not dangerous. That love and proximity can somehow neutralize harm. This story didn't scare me in the way ghost stories do. It didn't make me jump or look over my shoulder. It scared me in a quieter, deeper way. It made me think about how much people hide, how much they normalize, how much they endure without ever saying the words out loud. And it made me realize how thin the line is between an uncomfortable situation and a fatal one. I still think about her sometimes, about that night, about the way she looked at me with understanding before I even knew what she was seeing. I wish I had known more. I wish she had been safe. I wish helping her mom hadn't meant putting herself directly in the path of someone capable of that kind of violence. It's not the creepiest story in a dramatic sense, but it's one that changed the way I look at people, at tension, at the quiet signals we sometimes ignore because they don't seem urgent enough. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that feel almost normal right up until they aren't. So, recently, something happened that rattled me in a way I wasn't expecting. especially because it came out of nowhere and hit an old nerve I thought I'd buried years ago. I was sitting at my desk late at night, scrolling through Reddit, killing time the way you do when you're not quite ready to sleep. It was pitch black outside, the kind of dark where your window turns into a mirror and you can't see anything beyond the glass. I had the window open because it was a little stuffy in the room, and everything was quiet. No TV on, no music, just the soft hum of my computer and the occasional night sound drifting in. Then, out of nowhere, a voice came from just outside the window. It was deep, raspy, too close. It said very clearly, "Hey, fella." I swear my soul tried to leave my body. I jumped so hard my chair screeched backward. Yeah, my heart instantly pounding like I'd just been dropped into ice water. I didn't stop to think, didn't try to look, didn't say a word. I lunged forward and slammed the window shut as fast as I could, hands shaking so badly I fumbled with the latch for a second before locking it. I stood there frozen, staring at the glass, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no movement. Just silence and my own breathing, loud and uneven in my ears. I don't answer the door. Ever. I don't care who it is or what time it is. And I sure as hell am not answering a window in the middle of the night. Whoever or whatever that was, they weren't getting a response from me. I backed away slowly, turned on every light in the room, and sat there for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just some random person messing around. Or maybe someone walking by who thought it would be funny. But the way it sounded, the tone, the closeness, the way it felt like it was directed only at me, it stirred up something old, something I hadn't thought about in years. Because that wasn't the first time I'd heard a voice like that. When I was a kid, there was this basement. Every house has a basement story, but this one was different for me. I don't know why it scared me so much. Nothing bad had ever happened there that I knew of. It wasn't especially dark or moldy or full of spiders. It was just a basement, concrete floor, exposed beams, shelves along the walls, and a large walk-in closet at the far end. But I hated it. I mean, truly hated it. The kind of fear that doesn't make sense and doesn't need a reason. My stomach would knot up just standing at the top of the stairs. I never liked going down there alone, and if I had to, I'd do it as fast as possible. Lights blazing, heart racing, imagining something just out of sight behind me. One day, my whole family was outside at the far end of the yard. I was playing with my parents and grandparents, running around, having fun, when I suddenly remembered a toy I really wanted. Of course, it was in the basement. Of course, no one wanted to go get it for me. They brushed me off, told me to get it myself, said there was nothing to be scared of. I stood there for a moment, weighing my options. I didn't want to be the scared kid. I didn't want to miss out. So I decided I was going to do it. I walked up to the house alone. As soon as I opened the door, that familiar dread crept in. The house felt quieter without everyone else in it. I made my way to the basement door, opened it, and stared down the stairs. The darkness below felt heavy, like it was waiting. I took a breath and started down. With every step, I chanted under my breath, "There's no such thing as ghosts. There's no such thing as ghosts." Over and over like a spell. Like if I said it enough times, it would protect me. My voice shook at first, but I forced it louder as I went down each step. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned the corner, still chanting. The basement light cast long shadows along the walls. Everything looked normal, exactly the same as always. But my fear only grew. I could feel it pressing in on me, crawling up my spine. The walk-in closet was at the far end of the basement. Of course my toy was in there. Of course it was all the way in the back. I kept chanting as I walked toward it, my voice getting louder, more desperate. I opened the closet door. It creaked slightly. the sound echoing in the quiet space. Shelves lined the walls, boxes stacked haphazardly, old coats hanging limp. I stepped inside, halfway into the closet, reached for the pull cord to turn on the light, and grabbed my toy from the back. In that moment, flooded with adrenaline and relief, I shouted, "There's no such thing as ghosts!" And then I heard it. A laugh. Not a chuckle. Not a human laugh. It was deep, low, and inhuman, like it came from somewhere that wasn't meant to produce sound. It filled the basement instantly, wrapping around me, vibrating in my chest. It wasn't far away. It felt close. Too close. The fear that hit me was overwhelming. It wasn't just being scared. It was pure, primal terror. My vision narrowed, my ears rang, and for a split second, I genuinely thought I was going to pass out right there. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran so fast, my feet slipped on the concrete, scrambling for traction like something out of a cartoon before I took off. I bolted out of the closet, across the basement, up the stairs, screaming at the top of my lungs. I burst through the back door and didn't stop until I reached my family at the end of the yard, sobbing and gasping for air. I tried to tell them what happened. I told them about the laugh, about how it sounded, about how terrified I was. They didn't believe me. They laughed it off, told me I imagined it, said I scared myself because I already didn't like the basement. They chalked it up to a kid's imagination and moved on. The only person who believed me was my grandmother. Later, when she thought I wasn't listening, I heard her say to my parents very quietly, "I told you something was in the basement." That sentence has stayed with me my entire life. I never went into that basement again. Not alone. Not with someone else. Not ever. If I needed something from down there, it could stay there. Years passed. I grew up. I told myself it was just a childhood fear, a trick of the mind, a memory exaggerated by time. I stopped thinking about it until that night at my desk, until a deep, raspy voice spoke to me from the darkness outside my window, and my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I don't know who it was. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's connected or if my mind just made the connection on its own. But I do know this. Some fears don't come from nothing, and some memories don't fade because they were never meant to. And whatever was in that basement back then, whatever laughed at me when I was a kid, I've never fully believed it stayed there. I worked with her in the early 90s in southwestern Pennsylvania. Her name was Jolene. We weren't best friends, but we were close enough that her absence later felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain. She was one of those people who fit easily into a workplace. Friendly without being fake, quiet without being withdrawn. The kind of person you could talk to during a break and feel a little lighter afterward. At the time, I didn't know much about her personal life. We talked about work, weekend plans, small things. I had no idea she was seeing someone. And I definitely didn't know that the man she was involved with already had a girlfriend. None of that was public knowledge. If Jolene knew the full situation, she never shared it with me, and if she didn't, then she was being lied to, just like everyone else in that kind of mess. What I learned later came out in pieces, through news reports and hushed conversations. Apparently, the man she was seeing had been in a long-term relationship. When his girlfriend found out about Jolene, she ended things. Instead of taking responsibility for his own choices, instead of sitting with the consequences of what he had done, he decided to blame Jolene for everything, as if she had ruined his life by existing in it. That kind of thinking still chills me. The way some people can shift all their guilt and anger onto someone else, convincing themselves that the other person deserves punishment for their own mistakes. In early 1996, he contacted Jolene and asked her to meet him. He suggested a popular spot that young people in the area used to go to drink. It was one of those places everyone knew about, but no one officially acknowledged. A place that felt harmless because it had always been there. Kids went there to hang out, to drink, to feel rebellious without really thinking about the danger. The spot was near an old vertical mine shaft, a relic from when mining had been the backbone of the region. The shaft was deep, estimated to be around 900 feet. Over time, kids had laid a wooden plank across part of it, a crude bridge of sorts. People would sit on that plank, legs dangling, laughing, drinking, dropping empty bottles down the darkness just to hear how long it took before they hit something far below. It was reckless, but it had become normalized. Nothing bad had happened there before, at least not that anyone talked about. That night, Jolene met him there. They sat together on that plank, above a hole that most people treated like a novelty instead of what it really was, a vertical drop into nothingness, with hundreds of feet of open air and water at the bottom. No one knows exactly what was said between them. I don't know if they argued. I don't know if she thought they were there to talk things through, to get closure, to end things peacefully. I don't know if she trusted him in that moment or if she felt uneasy but stayed anyway, trying to be polite, trying to be reasonable. What we do know is that at some point, he pushed her. There was no accident, no slip, no loss of balance. He shoved her off the plank and into the shaft. 900 feet. When I first heard that detail, my mind couldn't process it. I kept trying to imagine the fall, and every time my thoughts went there, I had to stop. The idea of that much empty space beneath you, the sudden realization that there's nothing to grab onto, nowhere to land, is unbearable to think about. I still don't know how long it would take to fall that far. I don't know if there was time to scream, to think, to feel fear. I don't know if she lost consciousness quickly or if she was aware for longer than anyone should ever have to be. At the bottom of the shaft, there was water, a couple 100 feet of it. Even that detail doesn't bring comfort. Falling into water from that height is not gentle. It's not like jumping into a lake. It's like hitting concrete. When authorities tried to recover her body, they brought in cave divers. 2 of them went down into that shaft, descending into darkness that most people will never experience. What they found wasn't a body in any recognizable sense. They found pieces. That word alone haunted me. Pieces. Her hair was found stuck to the side of the shaft in places, caught on rough stone as her body fell. That image has never left me. It's the kind of detail that lodges itself in your brain and refuses to go away, no matter how much you wish it would. I had nightmares for weeks after the story came out. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, my mind replaying images I had never actually seen but couldn't stop imagining. Even now, decades later, I can't think about it for too long. If I let my mind linger on the details, the fear and sadness come rushing back like it just happened yesterday. What hurts almost as much as the violence itself is how senseless it was. Jolene didn't deserve any of it. She didn't betray anyone. She didn't ruin anyone's life. She was a woman who got involved with the wrong person, and instead of dealing with his own guilt and consequences, he decided to destroy her. I think about her sometimes in quiet moments, about how she laughed at work, about how ordinary her life was before it ended in such an extraordinary, brutal way, about how someone can go to work alongside you, share coffee and small talk, and then be gone forever because someone else couldn't face their own mistakes. I also think about that mine shaft, about how many people sat on that plank before and after, never knowing what had happened there, or knowing and still going anyway. How places can carry memories even when the world moves on around them. How violence doesn't always leave visible scars on the land, but it leaves them on the people who remember. More than anything, I hope she didn't suffer long. I hope she passed out quickly. I hope fear didn't have time to fully take hold. That hope might be irrational, but it's the only small mercy I can give her in my thoughts. Some stories don't fade. They don't become distant or abstract. They stay sharp, painful, and close, no matter how much time passes. Jolene's story is one of those for me. It's a reminder of how quickly trust can be weaponized, how fragile safety really is, and how one person's refusal to take responsibility can end another person's life in the most horrific way imaginable. I don't think I'll ever be able to bear thinking about it for very long. And maybe that's okay. Some things aren't meant to be revisited endlessly. Some things are meant to be remembered quietly, with sadness and respect, and then set down again before they break you. When my brother was in 10th grade, he stayed over at a friend's house one night with a group of kids they were all close to. It was nothing unusual, just a typical high school sleepover. A bunch of boys sprawled out on couches and floors, junk food everywhere, video games, music. That loud, restless energy teenagers have when they're supposed to be asleep but aren't. No one thought twice about it. These were kids who had grown up together, gone to school together, spent years in each other's houses. At some point during the night, one of the boys said he had to run out and take care of something. I don't know exactly what excuse he gave. It probably didn't even register as important. Teenagers leave all the time, especially if they live nearby. Nobody questioned it. He left the house, and the rest of them stayed behind laughing, talking, doing whatever kids do at 2 or 3 in the morning. What none of them knew was that he went home and murdered his entire family. He shot them all, his parents, his younger brothers who were still in middle school. Those boys weren't just names to us. My sister knew them well. She was close with them. They were kids who had been in our house, kids whose voices and faces were familiar. They were just gone, killed in their own home by someone who had been joking and hanging out with friends less than an hour earlier. After he did it, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He went back to the sleepover house. He walked back in like nothing had happened. He sat down with the rest of them. He talked. He laughed. He acted completely normal. No one noticed anything off. No blood on him. No visible panic. No breakdown. Just another kid coming back from wherever he said he was going. My brother slept in the same house as him that night, completely unaware of what had just taken place. That part alone is hard to process. The idea that someone could commit something so violent and then slip back into normality so seamlessly. That there were kids lying on the floor, half asleep, while the person next to them had just wiped out his entire family. But it gets worse. The next day, he planned a party at his house. A party. He invited people over for the following night, knowing full well that his family's bodies were still inside the house. They hadn't been discovered yet. They were still lying where they had fallen. And he was inviting friends over like it was just another weekend hangout. At some point, someone must have gotten suspicious. Maybe it was the behavior. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe someone heard something they couldn't quite explain. The police caught wind of the party and shut it down before it really got going. When they went inside the house, they found the truth. I don't know all the details of that moment, and honestly, I don't want to. Just knowing that police walked into a house expecting to break up a teenage party and instead found an entire family murdered is enough to turn your stomach. That house went from being a normal suburban home to a crime scene in an instant. The shock rippled outward fast. My brother came home different, quieter, more withdrawn. He didn't talk about it much at first, but you could tell it had shaken him. How could it not? Someone he had trusted, slept in the same house with, joked around with, turned out to be capable of something so horrific. It messes with your sense of reality. It makes you question how well you really know anyone. For our family, the horror didn't end with the arrest. For years afterward, my brother's friend called our house from jail. He would call the landline. Always the landline. Back then, you couldn't screen calls easily. You'd be sitting down to dinner, plates on the table, everyone talking about their day, and the phone would ring. That sharp, intrusive ring that cuts through everything. Someone would pick it up, and it would be him, calling from jail. Sometimes my brother would talk to him. At first, he felt conflicted. They had history. They had memories together. It's hard to reconcile the person you knew with the person who did something like that. There's guilt in cutting someone off, even when they've done the unforgivable. There's confusion. There's denial. There's that lingering thought that maybe, somehow, the person you knew still exists somewhere underneath what they did. Those calls went on for years. They became a kind of haunting presence in our house. Not loud or dramatic, just this constant reminder that something horrible had brushed up against our lives and never fully left. We'd be eating dinner, passing food, talking about school or work, and suddenly, there it was. The voice of someone who had murdered his family, coming through the receiver, asking to speak to my brother. It changed the atmosphere every time. Even when my brother wasn't home, the calls would still come. Sometimes my parents would answer. Sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they'd hang up immediately. Other times they'd tell him my brother wasn't available. But just hearing his name, knowing who was on the other end of the line, was enough to make the room feel heavy. Eventually, my brother stopped answering. There wasn't a big announcement. He just stopped. He stopped picking up the phone when it was him. He stopped returning calls. He stopped engaging. At some point, he realized that whatever connection he felt to that person was outweighed by the reality of what he had done. There was no version of friendship that could survive that. The calls tapered off after that, but the memory of them didn't. Even now, years later, I can still picture those dinners. The phone ringing, the pause in conversation, the look that would pass between us when we realized who it was, that sense of unease settling over the table, like a cold draft through an open door. What haunts me the most isn't just the violence itself, though that's horrifying enough. It's the closeness of it. The fact that this wasn't some distant news story or faceless crime. This was someone who had been in our orbit. Someone whose voice came through our phone. Someone my brother had trusted enough to sleep in the same house with. It's the realization that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like kids at a sleepover. Sometimes they laugh at the same jokes, play the same games, complain about the same teachers. Sometimes they leave for a bit, come back, and no one notices anything wrong. It makes you think about how fragile normalcy really is, how thin the line is between an ordinary night and something that permanently alters multiple families' lives. One moment, a group of teenagers is hanging out, worrying about school and friendships. The next, an entire family is gone, and nothing will ever be the same. I think about my sister sometimes, about the younger boys she knew, the ones who were killed, kids who never got to grow up, who never got to leave middle school behind, who never got the chance to become anything beyond what they were at that moment. I think about how casually we assume there will always be more time. And I think about my brother having to carry that knowledge for the rest of his life, knowing that he shared laughter and space with someone capable of that level of violence, knowing that he slept peacefully while just miles away, something unspeakable had happened. Now that's the part that never really leaves you, not the headlines, not the court proceedings, not even the details of the crime itself. It's the phone ringing during dinner. It's the voice on the other end. It's the way ordinary life keeps going, even when something unimaginably wrong has already happened. This is one of those stories that feels too close to home. The kind that doesn't fade because it's tangled up with real people, familiar places, and the unsettling realization that something horrific happened right where ordinary life was going on. A family friend of ours had an uncle who was murdered in Colby, Wisconsin. His name was Robert Pogue. The person who killed him wasn't a stranger or some random criminal. It was his former best friend, Dean Allen, along with Dean's wife, Janice Allen. That part alone is hard to wrap your head around. Betrayal layered on top of violence, all wrapped up in personal history. From what I understand, the situation started when Janice contacted Dean after she had run off with Robert. She told Dean she regretted leaving, that she wanted out, that she needed to be rescued. Whether that was manipulation, panic, or something darker is hard to say. But Dean believed her, or at least believed enough to show up at the apartment in Colby where Robert and Janice were staying. What happened next was brutal. Instead of leaving together or confronting the situation and walking away, Dean and Janice turned on Robert. Together, they killed him inside that apartment. Someone he trusted. Someone he had called a friend. The violence didn't stop there. After he was dead, they dismembered his body, cutting him into pieces, stuffing the remains into garbage bags. Those bags were then driven out and dumped along the side of the highway, scattered throughout the county. Not even the dignity of being left in one place. Just pieces of a person, discarded like trash. The case eventually became well known, especially locally. It was later featured on a true crime show under the title The Butcher, which only added another layer of horror to it for people who already knew the story. Seeing something so close to home turned into content is unsettling in its own way. There's another detail that has always stuck with me because it makes the whole thing feel even more surreal. The father of a guy I graduated with was involved in investigating the case. According to what I've heard, he played a key role in getting a confession out of Janice. The story goes that she became infatuated with him during the investigation, convinced herself that he cared about her, and believed he would help her get out of prison so they could run away together. That delusion, that misplaced trust, is reportedly what led her to confess. Whether every detail of that is exactly right or not, the idea of someone being so detached from reality after committing such a crime is chilling on its own. And then there's the apartment. My dad once told me, almost casually, that he had partied in that very apartment years before the murder. Just normal get-togethers, drinks, music, people laughing. Nothing sinister at the time. Knowing that later someone would be killed and dismembered in that same space makes it hard not to think about how violence can hide in plain sight, how ordinary places can quietly carry extraordinary darkness. That's what makes this story linger. It's not just about the crime itself, though that's horrific enough. It's about how close it was, how intertwined it is with people I know, places I recognize, stories I grew up hearing. It's about realizing that something unimaginably violent can happen in a small town, in an apartment where people once hung out, committed by people who once called each other friends. Those are the stories that don't let you fully relax. The ones that remind you that evil doesn't always look like a monster from the outside. Sometimes it looks like a friend, a spouse, a familiar face, until it's far too late. I grew up knowing almost nothing about the person I was named after. I just knew I hated my name. It never felt like it fit me, and no one ever really explained where it came from. It was just there, attached to me, carrying a weight I couldn't quite name. For most of my life, it was just an annoyance, something I wished I could change. It wasn't until much later that I learned the truth, and once I did, the name stopped feeling annoying and started feeling unbearably sad. My father's cousin was murdered in Louisiana in the 1970s. He was a young man, and by all accounts, he was close to my father. Not just family close, but genuinely close. Best friends. The kind of bond that forms when you grow up together, share secrets, share plans, share a future you assume will always be there. One day, he was found dead. His head had been bashed in with a rock. Despite the brutality of that fact alone, the police ruled his death a suicide. No meaningful investigation, no serious follow-up, no effort to reconcile how someone could smash their own skull with a rock and call it self-inflicted. They closed the case and moved on. His mother, my great-aunt, did not. She went to the police station day after day. She begged, she argued, she demanded answers. She refused to accept what made no sense to her, because a mother knows when something is wrong. She knew her son hadn't taken his own life. She knew someone had done this to him. Instead of listening to her, the police grew irritated. Eventually, they threatened her. They told her that if she kept coming back, if she kept asking questions, she would be arrested and thrown in jail for harassment. That was their solution. Not justice, not investigation. Silence. She was forced to return home to Mississippi without answers, without closure, without anyone acknowledging that her son's life had mattered enough to deserve the truth. And that was it. No justice, no accountability, just a young man erased, reduced to a line in a report that never reflected reality. Years later, I was born, and I was given his name. No one explained why. No one told me the story. I just carried it, unaware of what it represented. I grew up disliking it, feeling disconnected from it, not knowing it was tied to violence, loss, and a family wound that never healed. When I finally learned the story, everything shifted. I stopped hating the name, but I didn't suddenly love it either. What I felt instead was grief, a deep, quiet sadness for someone I never met but somehow carry with me every day. A sadness for my great aunt, who fought for her son until she was threatened into silence. A sadness for my father, who lost his best friend and had to live with that unanswered loss for the rest of his life. Now, almost everyone who ever cared about that cousin is gone. My great aunt is gone. Others who remembered him are gone. The only one left is my father. He still remembers. He still carries it. And I carry it too, even though I came into the story decades later. Sometimes I think about what it would mean to try to reopen the investigation. Not because I'm naive about how hard that would be or how unlikely it might be to get answers after all this time, but because it feels wrong to let the story end the way it did. Wrong that his death was dismissed so casually. Wrong that his mother was punished for refusing to accept a lie. I don't know if anything could come of it. Evidence may be gone. Witnesses may be dead. The system that failed him once may fail him again. But the desire is there. Not for vengeance, just for truth, for acknowledgement, for someone, somewhere, to say that what happened to him mattered. Now when I hear my name, I don't just hear myself. I hear a life that was cut short and never properly mourned. I hear a mother's unanswered questions. I hear my father's quiet grief. And I carry all of that with me. Not as a burden I chose, but as a reminder that some stories don't end just because the people who lived them are gone. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. About 10 years ago, I was in my early 20s and studying abroad in London. I was young, impulsive, and feeling very independent for the first time in my life. One weekend, on a whim, I booked a solo trip to Venice. I didn't really tell anyone in my study abroad program that I was going. I didn't make a big plan or coordinate with friends. I just booked the ticket and went. At the time, it felt romantic and brave, like something I would only be able to do once in my life. The trip itself was beautiful. Venice was everything I had imagined and more. The canals, the narrow streets, the way the city felt like it existed slightly outside of time. I wandered for hours, taking photos, getting lost on purpose, sitting near the water and just watching people pass by. I felt safe enough during the day, surrounded by tourists and noise and movement. Nothing about the first day felt off. If anything, I felt proud of myself for navigating a foreign city alone. It was the second day that changed how I remember the trip. That morning, I went out with no real plan. I didn't have phone service in Italy, so there was no GPS, no Maps app, no easy way to reorient myself if I got turned around. I told myself that was part of the adventure. Venice felt like a city where getting lost was almost expected. Streets curved unexpectedly. Alleys narrowed into passages that barely fit two people, and every turn looked like it might lead somewhere interesting. At some point in the afternoon, it started to rain. Not a light drizzle, but a steady rain that soaked through clothes quickly. I decided it was time to head back to my accommodations. The problem was that I wasn't entirely sure where I was anymore. I recognized certain landmarks, but nothing that gave me a clear sense of direction. The rain made everything feel more enclosed, more muted, as if the city had pulled inward. I was walking quickly, trying to retrace my steps, when a man appeared beside me. He was older than me, maybe in his 40s or 50s, well-dressed and undeniably handsome in a polished European way. He held an umbrella and immediately offered to shield me from the rain. It happened so smoothly that I barely had time to react before we were walking side by side under the umbrella. We started talking casually. Nothing deep, just small talk. He asked where I was from, and when I told him I was American, his demeanor changed slightly. He became more animated, more enthusiastic. He told me he loved Americans, that he enjoyed meeting people from different countries. Then he insisted that he show me around Venice properly. I tried to decline politely. I told him I was already heading back, that I was tired, that I didn't want to impose. He waved it off easily, smiling, saying it was no trouble at all. He said he wanted to take me to a cafe, a real one, not a tourist place. He talked about giving me an authentic Italian experience. I didn't want to go. That part is important. I didn't feel excited or flattered. I felt hesitant. But I was young and I was raised to be polite, to not offend people, to not assume the worst. I told myself I was overthinking it. He hadn't done anything overtly wrong, so I agreed, telling myself it would just be a quick coffee and then I'd leave. We started walking. At first, everything felt normal enough. We passed cafes, shops, places that looked lively and familiar. But as we kept going, I realized we were moving away from the busy areas. The streets got quieter. The foot traffic thinned. The shops became fewer and farther between. The rain continued, making the streets slick and reflective, amplifying the sense of isolation. We walked for what felt like at least 20 minutes. I started to feel uneasy. I asked him how much farther it was, trying to sound casual. He smiled and said not much longer. He repeated that he didn't want to take me to a place meant for tourists. He wanted something real, something locals enjoyed. My anxiety grew with every step. Then we reached a small plaza. There were a few shops around the edges, but they were closed or closing, shutters pulled down, lights dim. From that plaza branched a narrow alley. It was noticeably darker than the surrounding area. No people, no lights, just heavy wooden doors lining the walls, the kind that looked like they led to private apartments or storage spaces. There were no signs, no menus, nothing that suggested a cafe existed down there. We stopped at the entrance to that alley. He turned to me with a wide grin that made my stomach drop. He gestured toward the alley and said, "This is the way," and then, without moving himself, motioned for me to walk ahead of him. That was the moment everything in my body screamed no. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't logic. It was pure instinct. A cold, heavy feeling settled in my chest. My legs felt rooted to the ground. Every alarm in my head went off at once. I knew, with a certainty that still scares me when I think about it, that I could not walk down that alley. I froze. I scrambled for an excuse and blurted out the first thing I could think of. I said I hadn't realized how late it had gotten and that I was supposed to meet my friend at my hotel. It was a complete lie. There was no friend, no meeting. But I needed a reason to leave that didn't escalate the situation. His face changed instantly. The grin faded. He looked disappointed, almost wounded. He insisted we continue. He said it would only take a moment. He tried to reassure me, stepping closer. I held my ground. I apologized again and said I really had to go. Then I turned and started walking in a different direction, toward one of the shops we had passed earlier, hoping to get back into a more public space. I walked quickly, my heart pounding, trying not to look back. He followed me. I could hear his footsteps behind me. He kept talking, trying to persuade me, telling me I was misunderstanding, that he just wanted to be kind. I didn't respond. I focused on getting back to people, to light, to anywhere that felt safer. I don't remember exactly how I lost him. I think I ducked into a shop or changed direction suddenly. All I know is that at some point, he was gone. I stood there for a long time afterward, shaking, pretending to browse, waiting until I was sure he wasn't nearby. Eventually, I found my way back to my accommodations, soaked from the rain and emotionally drained. Nothing actually happened to me that day. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't taken. I wasn't assaulted. And because of that, it's easy to dismiss the experience as nothing more than an uncomfortable encounter. It's easy to tell yourself that he might have been a perfectly normal man who genuinely wanted to show a foreigner a nice cafe. But that's not how it feels when I think about it now. What stays with me isn't what he did. It's what I felt. That moment at the entrance to the alley when my body reacted before my mind could catch up. That feeling that if I took one more step forward, something irreversible would happen. That I wouldn't be able to undo it. That whatever waited down that alley was not something I could walk away from. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone with him. I don't know if my fear was justified or if I narrowly avoided something terrible. But I do know that every time I think about Venice, that moment surfaces alongside the beauty. The rain, the dark alley, the grin, the gesture for me to walk ahead. It taught me something I've never forgotten. Politeness is not worth your safety. Instinct exists for a reason. And sometimes the most dangerous situations don't come with obvious threats or violence, but with smiles, umbrellas, and offers that sound harmless on the surface. That trip was wonderful in many ways, but that moment still sticks with me. A quiet reminder of how close you can come to the edge of something without ever fully seeing it. My parents were traveling out of state when it happened. Just a normal trip, nothing unusual, nothing that should have ended the way it did. Somewhere along the way, a drunk driver crossed into their path. The impact was violent and sudden. My father died instantly. There was no chance, no last words, no moment for anyone to understand what was happening. My mother survived, but only barely. She was airlifted from the scene in critical condition. Doctors weren't sure at first if she would make it. She did, but when she woke up, there were pieces of her life that were simply gone. She has no memory of the accident itself, no memory of the impact, no memory of the immediate aftermath. In fact, there's a blank space that covers about 2 weeks after the crash. It's like someone cut that time out of her life entirely. For a long time, that absence haunted her. She knew intellectually that my father was gone. She knew what people told her. She knew what the reports said. But emotionally, something didn't connect. She couldn't remember their final moments together. She couldn't remember the sound of his voice that day, or what they talked about in the car, or even if they were laughing or arguing or just sitting quietly. That loss of memory became its own kind of grief, separate from losing him. As the legal process moved forward and the case went toward trial, our lawyer gathered everything related to the crash. Reports, statements, evidence. Eventually, the crime scene photos were uploaded to a secure client portal. The lawyer was hesitant about it at first, but my mother was persistent. She wanted to see them. She believed, or at least hoped, that seeing the images might unlock something in her mind. Some small detail, some visual cue that would bring back even a fragment of her last moments with my father. We were nervous about it. Crime scene photos are not meant to bring comfort. They're clinical, brutal, and final. But she insisted, and in the end, it was her choice. When we finally sat down to look at them together, the room felt heavy. No one spoke much. Each image carried a weight that was hard to put into words. Twisted metal, broken glass, the unmistakable stillness of something that had once been alive and moving. Then we came to one particular photo. It was an image of my father still sitting behind the wheel. His body was clearly lifeless. There was no denying that. But what drew our attention immediately was something else. Near his shoulder, close to him in a way that felt intimate and deliberate, there was a face. It was faint, almost translucent. Ghostly is the only word that really fits. Not sharp or solid like the rest of the image, but still unmistakably there. A face looking toward him. And it looked exactly like my mother. Not vaguely. Not sort of. Exactly. The shape of her face, the expression, the way her features sit when she's calm and focused. It was her. In the photo, her seat was empty. She had already been removed from the vehicle and taken to the hospital by that point. Physically, she was nowhere near him when that picture was taken. And yet, there she was, right beside him. It was eerie. There's no denying that. A dead man in the driver's seat, and what looks like the face of his wife hovering near him, is not an easy thing to process. It's the kind of image that could easily disturb or frighten someone, especially in the context of such a violent loss. But that isn't what it did to us. Instead, it brought an unexpected sense of peace. We didn't jump to conclusions. We didn't claim certainty. We understand how photos can behave strangely. Reflections, lighting, shadows, compression artifacts. The human brain's tendency to recognize faces where none exist. We know all of that. We've talked about it. We've considered every rational explanation. And still, there was something about that image that felt different. Something about the timing, the placement, the familiarity of the face. It didn't feel random. It didn't feel like a trick of the light, at least not to us. My mother stared at that photo for a long time. She didn't cry at first. She just looked at it, quietly, like she was trying to absorb something she'd been missing. When she finally spoke, she said she felt calm. Not relieved exactly, but settled in a way she hadn't been since the accident. She said it felt like she had been there with him. Not physically, not in a way she could remember, but in a way that mattered. From that moment on, a belief began to form in our family. Not something rigid or dogmatic, but something gentle. We like to think that her soul stayed with him for a while. That even though her body was taken away and worked on by doctors, some part of her remained by his side. That she didn't leave him alone in those moments after the crash. And maybe in that quiet space between life and death, he told her to go back. Maybe he reminded her that she was still needed, that there were people waiting for her, that her story wasn't finished yet, that she had to come back to us, to the life they had built together, even if he couldn't be part of it anymore. We know this is a belief, not a fact. We know there are other explanations. But belief doesn't always need proof to be meaningful. Sometimes it just needs to bring comfort. And this did. For my mother especially, it helped her let go of the guilt she didn't even realize she was carrying. The guilt of surviving. The guilt of not remembering. The guilt of not being able to say goodbye. Seeing that image allowed her to feel for the first time that she hadn't abandoned him in his final moments. For the rest of us, it softened the edges of our grief. It didn't take the pain away. Nothing could do that. But it gave us a way to imagine those moments as less lonely, less cold. It gave us something gentle to hold on to when the reality felt too harsh. Even now, when we talk about it, we're careful with our words. We don't claim to know what happens after death. We don't insist that the image proves anything supernatural. We simply say that it brought us peace, that it allowed us to believe in our own quiet way, that love doesn't end the moment a heart stops beating. My mother still has no memory of the accident. That blank space remains. But she no longer feels desperate to fill it. She no longer feels like something essential was stolen from her. In a strange way, that photo gave her something back, even if it wasn't a memory in the traditional sense. It gave her a feeling. And sometimes that's enough. We keep that image private. It's not something we show casually or talk about with everyone. It's personal, sacred in a way. A reminder that even in the worst moments of loss, there can be small, unexpected comforts. We lost my father that day. Nothing will ever change that, but we like to believe that he didn't lose my mother, that he helped send her back to us, that for a brief moment, whatever separates this world from the next grew thin enough for love to cross it. And whether that's true in a literal sense or not, it has helped us heal. When I was 13, I got sick on a school morning and begged my mom to let me stay home. It wasn't dramatic sickness, just that heavy, miserable feeling where your head hurts, your body feels wrong, and the idea of sitting in a classroom all day feels unbearable. My younger brother, who was 11 at the time, wasn't feeling great either. After some back and forth, my mom finally agreed to let us both stay home. There was a catch. My stepdad didn't know yet, and if he found out, it would turn into a whole thing. He was strict about school, and calling in sick without what he considered a real reason was not something he tolerated. So my mom told us we had to stay out of sight until he left for work. That meant hiding in the basement. That basement. Even now, years later, just thinking about it makes my stomach tighten. It was old and unfinished, the kind of basement that always felt colder than the rest of the house, no matter the season. The lighting was bad, yellow and dim, and the shadows seemed thicker down there, like they clung to the corners. There was outdated furniture that smelled faintly of dust and mildew, old couches and chairs that no one really used anymore, and boxes stacked in ways that made the space feel cluttered and closed in. There was also something else about it, something hard to describe, a weird atmosphere that didn't come from any one thing, but from the way the whole space felt. It was the kind of place where you never felt fully alone, even when you knew you were. We went into a room in the basement that my aunt used to hang out in when she lived with us. It wasn't really a bedroom, more like a makeshift living space. There was a couch, a small table, and a door that separated it from the rest of the basement. The bathroom and laundry area were farther down, past that door, through a narrow stretch where the walls felt like they were closing in on you. The plan was simple. We'd go down there, shut the door, and sleep until our stepdad left for work. Once he was gone, my mom would come get us, and we could move back upstairs like normal. At least that was the plan. I laid down on the couch and fell asleep pretty quickly. I was tired and sick, and the quiet, heavy air of the basement pulled me under faster than I expected. I don't know how long I slept, but I was jolted awake by my brother screaming. Not yelling my name, not calling for our mom, screaming for me to close the door. I shot upright, heart already racing, still half lost in sleep. He was standing near the door, his face pale, eyes wide, absolutely panicked. He was shaking and yelling at me to shut the door now, right now. I didn't understand what was happening. I asked him what was wrong, but he was barely listening. He just kept saying he'd seen something in the basement bathroom. Something huge, something furry. Through his panic, I managed to piece together what he was trying to say. He claimed he had woken up and looked toward the bathroom area and saw a massive, furry figure. He described it as looking like a human-sized cat. Not a regular animal. Upright. Wrong. He said it had been on top of the dryer and then jumped down, and that it was coming toward us. I didn't believe him at first. I thought he was having a nightmare, or trying to scare me, or that being sick had messed with his head. I told him to calm down, that there was nothing down there, that he must have imagined it. But even as I said it, I could hear how scared he was, and it made my own fear start to rise. Then I heard something. Scratching. It came from the wall, faint at first, like nails or claws dragging slowly along the surface. It wasn't random. It was moving. The sound traveled along the wall, inch by inch, heading toward the door of the room we were in. My blood ran cold. We both froze, listening. The scratching grew closer, clearer. It wasn't inside the walls. It sounded like it was right on the other side, moving deliberately, like whatever was making the noise knew exactly where we were. Then came the knocking. Slow, light, intentional. Knock, knock, scratch, knock, knock, scratch. It wasn't the kind of knocking a person does when they want to be let in. There was no rhythm you'd expect from a hand. It felt wrong, like it was testing the door, feeling it out. Each knock sent a jolt through my chest. I started crying immediately. Full-on panic crying, the kind where you can't control the sound of your own breathing. I jumped up and started banging on the ceiling with my fist, screaming for my mom to come get us, to help us, to please come downstairs. The knocking got harder. It wasn't violent, but it was more forceful, more confident. Like whatever was on the other side had realized we weren't opening the door. My brother started crying too, sobbing and describing the creature again in a shaking voice. He kept saying it was hairy, that it was big, that it wasn't human. He was convinced it was still right there. It's just waiting. I didn't want to look at the door. I didn't want to imagine what was on the other side. I just wanted it to stop. We were too scared to move, too scared to open the door, too scared to even scream anymore. At some point, the fear was so overwhelming that our bodies just shut down. We curled up where we were and tried to pretend nothing was happening. Like if we ignored it long enough, it would go away. I don't remember falling back asleep, but I must have. Or maybe I just blacked out from fear. Either way, the next clear memory I have is my mom coming to get us around 12:30 in the afternoon. She opened the door and called our names, and we both jumped up instantly. We didn't explain anything right away. We didn't stop to look around. We ran past her as fast as we could, up the basement stairs, out into the light of the main floor, desperate to get as far away from that space as possible. The basement felt different after that. Worse. Heavier. My brother didn't want to talk about what happened. Anytime it came up, even years later, he'd shut down or change the subject. You could tell it still bothered him deeply. It wasn't just a scary memory to him. It was something that had marked him. For me, it was the combination of things that never sat right. The fact that we both heard the scratching, the knocking, the pattern, the way it felt intentional, the way the fear didn't fade once we were safe. I've tried to explain it logically over the years. Animals can get into basements, old houses make strange noises, kids imagine things, fear feeds fear. I have gone through every rational explanation I can think of, but none of them fully explain what happened. Whatever it was, whether it was something physical or something our minds created together in that moment, it left a lasting impact on both of us. That basement never felt the same again. Even now, as an adult, I feel uneasy in spaces like that. Low ceilings, poor lighting, old rooms that feel forgotten. Some places just hold on to something. And that basement was one of them. This is my own story, something I experienced firsthand, and even though I know there are people who have heard far worse or more dramatic things, this one has stayed with me in a way I can't really shake. At the time, I didn't even think of it as a ghost story. It was just something that happened to me, and only later did I realize how unsettling it really was. It was New Year's, and my family and I had gone on vacation to California. We decided to stay for 2 nights on the Queen Mary. I didn't know anything about the ship beforehand. I hadn't looked it up, I hadn't watched any videos, and I definitely hadn't heard about its reputation. To me, it was just a cool, historic ship turned into a hotel. That was it. We arrived around midday, maybe close to noon. Everything felt normal, busy even. There were tourists everywhere, people dragging suitcases through the hallways, staff checking people in, families taking photos. Nothing about the place felt creepy at first. If anything, it felt exciting, like staying somewhere unique instead of a regular hotel. Our room was set up with 2 separate sleeping areas divided by a door. My dad had one side, and I had the other. When we first got there, I walked into my side of the room, dropped my luggage near the door, and started unpacking. I remember feeling tired but relaxed, just going through my things, deciding what to hang up, what to leave in my bag. At some point, I stepped toward the center of the room, heading for the bed. I picked up a shirt to look at it more closely, holding it up in front of me. I was completely focused on that shirt, not thinking about anything else. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something touch my right leg. It wasn't a brush of fabric or the edge of furniture. It was very specific. The closest thing I can compare it to is the feeling of a cat rubbing itself against your leg. That gentle, deliberate pressure, like something alive moving against you. It lasted only a second, but it was clear enough that I stopped moving immediately. I looked down right away. There was nothing there. No object, no bag, no loose clothing. Nothing that could have caused that sensation. I even shifted my foot slightly, half expecting to feel something again, but there was nothing. I stood there for a moment, confused more than scared. I told myself it must have been my imagination, or maybe I brushed against something without realizing it. I shrugged it off and kept unpacking. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It was weird, sure, but not enough to really bother me. The rest of the day went by normally. We walked around the ship, explored different areas, took pictures, ate dinner, and eventually went to sleep. Nothing else happened that first night. The next day, we decided to go on one of the guided tours of the ship. It was one of those general history tours, not specifically a haunted one. Again, I still had no idea about the Queen Mary's reputation. I was just listening casually as the tour guide talked about the ship's past, its role during the war, how it was used, and what life on board used to be like. At one point, we made our way up to the upper deck. The guide started talking about something that immediately caught my attention. He mentioned that back when the ship was active, it had cats on board. The cats were there to control the rat population, which was apparently a common practice on ships at the time. Then he said something that made my stomach drop a little. He explained that even today, some guests and staff report strange experiences connected to those cats. People say they feel something rub against their legs, like a cat weaving around them, even when there's nothing there. Others say they've heard faint meowing sounds in certain areas of the ship. I remember just standing there, listening, feeling this slow wave of realization wash over me. I hadn't told anyone about what I felt in my room the day before. I hadn't even really thought about it again until that moment. And now here was this tour guide, casually describing the exact sensation I had felt. It could have been a coincidence, I know that, but it was still unsettling. I didn't say anything out loud. I just kept it to myself, filed it away in my head, and tried not to dwell on it too much. I didn't want to freak myself out over something that could still be explained away. The rest of the day passed without incident. We walked around more, explored different decks, took in the views, and eventually returned to our room late at night. By the time we got back, it was around 3 in the morning. The ship was much quieter then. Most people were asleep, and the hallways felt long and empty, lit by soft, dim lighting. I was tired and ready for bed. I went into my side of the room, leaving the door to my dad's side closed. I remember looking down at the floor as I walked, half asleep, just going through the motions of getting ready to lie down. Then I got chills. Not the kind you get when you're cold, but that sudden, full-body chill that comes out of nowhere. The kind that makes your skin prickle and your stomach tighten. I slowed down and lifted my head. That's when I saw it. Sitting on the very corner of my bed was something I still struggled to describe properly. It looked like a human-sized gray cloud. Not solid, not sharply defined, but dense enough that it clearly stood out against the rest of the room. It wasn't floating in the air. It was sitting right there on the edge of the bed, as if it had weight. For a split second, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. Then it did, all at once. The moment I realized that there was something on my bed that absolutely should not be there, panic took over. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I turned around and ran. I bolted straight into my dad's room, laughing hysterically as I ran. Not because it was funny, but because I was terrified. It was that kind of laughter that comes from pure fear, when your body doesn't know how else to react. I must have looked completely unhinged. I told my dad what I had seen, stumbling over my words, still half laughing, half panicking. He looked concerned but calm, trying to reassure me. After a moment, we both walked back into my room together. There was nothing there. The bed was empty. The room looked exactly the same as it always had. No gray cloud, no shadow, no movement. Just a quiet hotel room in the middle of the night. Even though it was gone, the fear didn't disappear with it. I felt shaken, exposed like I had just seen something I wasn't supposed to see. I ended up staying in my dad's room for a while, trying to calm down. Eventually, I did go back to my bed, but I barely slept that night. Every little sound made me tense. Every shadow felt suspicious. Later on, after the trip, I learned more about the Queen Mary. I learned about how people consider it extremely haunted, especially certain areas and rooms, including the one near where we stayed. I learned about the stories, the sightings, the experiences other people have had. Looking back, that knowledge almost makes it worse. I don't know what I felt or what I saw. I don't know if it was my imagination, exhaustion, or something else entirely. I don't claim to have answers. All I know is that those moments felt real to me. The sensation on my leg, the timing of the tour guide's story, the thing on my bed. Even now, years later, I can picture that gray shape sitting there. I can remember exactly how my body reacted before my mind even caught up. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it, that trip to the Queen Mary will always stand out as one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. In my mid-20s, I worked for a farm chemical and fertilizer company at a small satellite location. It was quiet, isolated, and most days felt almost too calm. There were only 2 of us assigned to that store, me and my boss. During the week, we worked together, but every other Saturday, the schedule rotated so that one person worked alone from 8 in the morning until noon. Those Saturdays were usually mine. The building sat a little outside of town, surrounded by open land and long stretches of road where you could go several minutes without seeing another car. The office was attached to a warehouse where we stored fertilizer, seed, and chemicals. Most of the time, Saturdays were boring in the best way. A farmer might stop by for supplies, or the phone might ring once or twice, but otherwise it was just paperwork, inventory checks, and the hum of the building settling around you. I have pretty severe allergies, and because of that, I almost never brought my dog with me to work. She was a female healer mix, smart, alert, and deeply attached to me. Bringing her into an environment full of dust, chemicals, and pollen usually meant I'd pay for it later with swollen eyes and a scratchy throat. So as much as I loved having her around, I left her at home nearly every time. But one Saturday morning, I woke up with a strange feeling I couldn't explain. Nothing dramatic, nothing panicky. Just a quiet, persistent thought that I should bring her with me that day. I remember standing in my kitchen, leash in hand, arguing with myself. I told myself it was silly. I reminded myself how miserable my allergies could get. And still, the feeling didn't go away. So I brought her. She rode in the passenger seat like she always did, sitting upright, ears forward, watching everything. When we got to the store, I set her up in the office with some water and her blanket. She settled in easily, like she belonged there. The morning went on as usual. I did some paperwork, answered a couple of calls, and then headed out into the warehouse to check inventory. The warehouse was louder than the office, with echoes and the smell of fertilizer hanging in the air. I was moving bags and checking labels when I heard the sound of a truck pulling up outside. That wasn't unusual in itself, but something about it made me pause. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps coming in through the main door. It was a man from the main branch of the company. He was in his mid-50s, and I'd seen him around before at meetings or company events. From the first time I met him, he had always given me the creeps. There was nothing I could point to specifically. No single moment I could say was clearly inappropriate. But every interaction with him left me uneasy. He made comments that felt off. Things like calling me trouble or saying look out for her in a tone that didn't sound playful. Sometimes he'd smirk when he said it, like there was a joke I wasn't in on. Other times, he'd just stare a little too long. I always brushed it off as him being socially awkward or weird, because that was easier than trusting the discomfort in my gut. The important thing was that he had absolutely no reason to be at my location that day. The satellite store didn't receive deliveries on Saturdays, and he wasn't scheduled to work there. If someone from the main branch needed something, they usually called ahead. I was in the warehouse when he appeared, and when I turned and saw him standing there, my stomach dropped. He didn't greet me right away. He just stood there looking at me like he was assessing something. And before I could say anything, my dog came running in from the office. She positioned herself directly in front of me, body stiff, ears back, teeth bared. Then she growled. It wasn't a playful growl. It wasn't a warning bark. It was deep, low, and steady. The kind of sound that makes the hair on your arms stand up. She had never done that before. Not to a delivery driver, not to a customer, not to anyone. She was cautious by nature, but never aggressive. Seeing her react that way instantly sent a jolt of fear through me. The man froze. He looked at my dog, then back at me. For a moment, no one spoke. The warehouse felt very quiet, like everything was holding its breath. He laughed awkwardly and said something dismissive, like, guess she doesn't like me. But there was something forced about it. He took a step back, then another. He didn't ask why I had my dog with me. He didn't explain why he was there. He just turned around and left. I stood there shaking, my dog still planted in front of me until his truck pulled away. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. I locked the doors, something I didn't usually do during business hours. and stayed in the office with my dog until noon. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he really did just stop by for something. Maybe my dog sensed my anxiety and reacted to that. Maybe I was overthinking it. But the feeling didn't go away. The following Monday morning, I was back at work when the phone rang. It was someone from the main office. Their voice was careful, hesitant. They asked me if I'd heard about what happened to that employee. I said no. There was a pause, and then they told me. Sometime after he'd left my location on Saturday, he went home. He shot his wife. Then he shot himself. I remember sitting down hard in my chair, like my legs had stopped working. My ears rang. I could barely process the words. My mind immediately went back to the warehouse, to the way he'd looked at me, to the way my dog had stepped in front of me without hesitation. After the call ended, I just sat there, staring at nothing. I don't know what his intentions were that morning. I don't know why he came to my store, unannounced, on a day he wasn't supposed to be there. I don't know what he was thinking when he stood in that warehouse with me alone. What I do know is that my dog sensed something I didn't fully understand yet. She reacted in a way she never had before or since. She put herself between me and a man who, not long after, proved himself capable of extreme violence. People like to say animals can sense danger, but it's easy to dismiss that idea until you experience it firsthand. Until you see your normally gentle dog bare her teeth and growl at someone who later commits murder. Until you realize that a decision you almost didn't make might have changed everything. I think about that Saturday often, about how close it might have been, about how easily things could have gone differently if I'd left my dog at home like I usually did, about how sometimes the smallest choices, the ones that don't seem important at the time, end up being the most critical. I don't believe in fate in a grand mystical sense, but I do believe that instinct matters. I believe that animals see things we don't, sense things we've trained ourselves to ignore, and I believe that my dog saved my life. There's no doubt in my mind about that. My dad comes from a family of farmers and builders. He grew up on a third-generation farm in Idaho with 6 brothers and sisters. The kind of place where everyone learned early how to work with their hands and fix what was broken instead of throwing it away. The land had been in the family for generations, and so had the habits that came with it. Long days, early mornings, calloused hands, and the quiet pride of knowing you built something solid that would last. All of the boys in the family went into construction trades when they grew up. Carpentry, concrete, framing, roofing. One of my dad's brothers eventually specialized in electrical engineering, and he was good at it. Really good. He had the kind of mind that could look at a set of plans and see the whole thing finished before a single nail was driven. He understood systems, how everything connected, how one small mistake could ripple through an entire structure. He married a woman who was just as driven and capable as he was. She started her career as a police officer and eventually became a head detective. Between the two of them, they were disciplined, focused, and practical. They planned their lives carefully and worked hard for everything they had. Not long after they found out they couldn't conceive, my uncle decided to build their dream house. Instead of letting that loss hollow them out, they poured everything they had into creating something tangible. He designed it himself, every beam and wire intentional. They spent all their money and energy on it, building a home that was meant to be permanent, a place where a family would grow and memories would stack up year after year. A couple of years later, they were given the opportunity to adopt a little Native American boy from one of the local tribes. They didn't hesitate. They welcomed him into that house with open arms, and for the first time, the rooms had a different kind of life in them. Toys on the floor, laughter echoing down the hallways, the sound of feet running through spaces that had once been quiet. A few years after that, they adopted a little black girl. Suddenly, the family they had dreamed of was real. Two kids, different backgrounds, different stories, but completely theirs. They raised them together in that house, the one built with so much care and hope. From the outside, it looked like everything had finally fallen into place. Their son grew into a strong, active kid. He loved sports, loved being outside, loved pushing himself. Snowmobiling, football, anything that gave him speed and adrenaline. With that kind of life came injuries, and by the time he was 16, he'd already had his fair share. Bruises, broken bones, surgeries. It was just part of who he was, part of how he lived. When he needed knee surgery, no one thought much of it beyond the inconvenience. He was tough. He'd bounce back. The surgery went as planned, and he was sent home with pain medication and instructions to rest. He was enrolled in physical therapy and expected to be back on his feet soon enough. The Monday after the surgery, he stayed home from school. He told his parents he was still in a lot of pain, that he didn't feel great, and that he just wanted to sleep it off. That didn't raise any red flags. He was only 72 hours out from surgery, adjusting to limited mobility, new medications, and the frustration of being sidelined during football season. Any 16-year-old in that position would feel miserable. A few hours passed during the day. His mom went to work. His dad left earlier and then came back home to meet her so they could go to an appointment together. It was an ordinary day, the kind that never feels important until later when you realize it was the last normal one you'd ever have. When his dad walked into the house, he called out for his son. No answer. He checked the massive living room, one of his son's favorite places to hang out. Nothing. He checked his bedroom, the other spot he usually camped out in. Empty. He kept calling his name as he walked through the house, his voice getting louder, more urgent. That's when he heard a loud bang from the garage. At first, it didn't register as anything serious. It sounded like something falling off a shelf, or maybe something shifting on the trailer. Normal garage noises. The kind you don't think twice about in a house like that. He walked into the garage to see what had fallen. What he found instead was his son lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood, holding his wife's service weapon. There was no note, no explanation, no warning, just a moment that split their lives cleanly in two. The investigation didn't uncover anything that made sense. No history of depression, no signs of planning, nothing that matched the boy everyone knew. The only conclusion anyone could reach was an educated guess. The new prescription, medications he'd been given after surgery, likely weren't compatible with each other. The combination may have altered his thinking, intensified his pain, and distorted his sense of reality to the point where suicide felt like the only way to make it stop. Before the surgery, he had been carefree, full of life, the kind of kid who laughed easily and made plans for the future without hesitation. That's the version of him everyone remembers, and that's what makes it so hard to reconcile with how he died. My uncle and his wife still live in that house, the dream house, the one built with so much hope and intention. They never moved. My uncle still pulls into that garage every single day after work, 15 years later. The same garage where he found his son. The same space that should have just been another part of the home he built with his own hands. I don't know how he does it. I don't know how you live inside a place that holds that kind of memory without it crushing you. But he does, every day. He parks the car, closes the door, and keeps going. I still miss him every day. There are moments when it hits me out of nowhere. The weight of everything he never got to do. The life he never got to live. The milestones he never reached. In a couple of weeks, I'm getting married, and I can't stop thinking about how he should be there. He should be standing next to me as my best man. He should be older now, teasing me, telling stories, laughing. Instead, he's frozen at 16 in my memory. Always recovering from surgery. Always staying home from school. Always just a few hours away from a moment that no one could have predicted or stopped. Some losses never make sense, no matter how much time passes. You can understand the circumstances, the medications, the logic people use to explain it, and it still doesn't feel real. It still feels wrong. All that love, all that effort, all that future ended in a place that was supposed to be safe. And yet life keeps moving forward. The house still stands. The garage door still opens and closes. The family still wakes up every morning and goes on. But there's a quiet absence that never leaves, a space that can't be filled by explanations or time. I carry him with me into everything I do now. Into my wedding. Into my future. Into the moments where joy and grief exist side by side. I don't think that ever goes away. I don't think it's supposed to. When I was around 11 years old, my family of 6 had just moved out of a tiny one-bedroom house into a 3-bedroom place. At the time, it felt like a huge upgrade. More space, more privacy, and for the first time, it felt like we weren't all stacked on top of each other. The neighborhood was quiet, nothing unusual. And for the first month or two, everything felt normal and calm. My bedroom had a direct line of sight to the backyard. Because I was scared of the dark, my mom had put up these thin, lacy white curtains over the window. They didn't really block much, but they made me feel a little better. Our dog slept in front of the back door every night, and she was aggressive towards strangers. So between the dog and the curtains, I usually felt safe enough to fall asleep. That night didn't start out strange at all. It was late, and the house was quiet in the way it only gets when everyone is fully asleep. I could clearly hear my sister snoring from across the room, and my dad's loud snoring carried down the hallway. All the bedroom doors were open, which was normal for us. The floors in that house were old and creaky, especially in one unavoidable spot near my room. Anyone walking toward my bed would have had to step there, and I would have heard it. There was no doubt about that. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, trying to fall asleep. Out of nowhere, I felt this overwhelming, protective urge to hug my sister. It wasn't just a thought. It felt urgent. Like something inside me was telling me I needed to make sure she was okay. I remember thinking it was strange because she was clearly asleep and fine. I could hear her breathing. Still, the feeling didn't go away. Then everything changed. My body suddenly went cold. Like all the warmth drained out of me at once. Before I could even process that feeling, I felt a hand touch the top of my head. Not brushing past me, not bumping into me. A full, solid hand resting there. I froze completely. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. My chest felt tight, like it was locked in place. The hand was warm. That's the part that still messes with me. It wasn't cold or rough. It was warm and gentle, almost careful. like whoever it belonged to was trying not to scare me. But I was terrified. My mind raced through every possible explanation. It wasn't my sister. She was still snoring. It wasn't my dad. He was snoring loudly too, and if he had come into my room, I would have seen the hallway light. My mom never walked around the house in the dark. She always turned lights on. And I would have heard my brothers complain because their room lined up with the hallway in a way that carried sound. And even if it had been one of them, I would have heard footsteps. The floors would have given it away, but there was nothing. The hand stayed there for what felt like forever. Minutes stretched into something that felt like hours. I could feel my heart pounding, but my body wouldn't respond. At some point, I felt fingers gently scratch my scalp, slow and deliberate, like someone soothing a child. That was when I almost lost it completely. I wanted to cry, but even that felt impossible. And then, just as quietly as it arrived, the hand lifted away. No footsteps, no creaking floorboards, no sound at all. I stayed frozen long after it was gone. I don't know how much time passed before I could move again. It felt like at least an hour. When I finally managed to sit up, my whole body was shaking. I got out of bed and went straight to my sister. She was still asleep, completely fine. Seeing her like that made something inside me break, and I silently cried next to her bed without really knowing why. Eventually, I went to my parents' room and told them everything. They listened, but they didn't believe it was real. They told me it must have been a dream or sleep paralysis. They pointed out that our dog hadn't reacted at all, and she was vicious when it came to strangers. No barking, no growling, nothing. Being a kid and trying to be reasonable, I accepted that explanation, even though it didn't sit right with me. I tried to forget about it. About a week later, I came home from school and saw police cars outside our house. My heart dropped instantly. My first thought was my sister. I ran inside, panicked, only to find my parents with all my siblings. Everyone was physically okay, and that alone made me feel weak with relief. After things calmed down, I asked what had happened. Behind our house was a 2-story shed. My dad kept tools stored on the upper level. That day, he had gone up there to grab something and found a woman hiding inside. She was dirty, thin, and clearly hadn't been living normally. When my dad confronted her, she didn't panic. She didn't run. She just smiled at him. Then she said something that still makes my stomach turn. She told him my sister was pretty and asked if he still wanted her. The police were called immediately. When I heard that, everything from that night came rushing back all at once. The warmth of the hand, the strange urge to protect my sister, the complete silence, the way nothing made sense at the time. To this day, I don't know if that woman ever entered our house or if she was watching us from outside. I don't know if the hand I felt belonged to her or if my mind filled in the gaps after learning the truth. I only know that the fear I felt that night was real, and the danger was real too. That experience never left me. Even now, years later, I still lock my doors and windows without fail. I still get chills thinking about that night, and sometimes I swear I can feel that hand again when I'm half asleep. Please, always lock your doors and windows. Sometimes the danger isn't imaginary, and sometimes you don't realize how close it was until much later. A girl lived in a small village not far from where my parents live. It was the kind of place where people know each other, where distances feel short, and where parents don't usually think twice about letting their children walk alone. Nothing ever seemed to happen there. Life moved slowly. Days blended into each other. It felt safe in the way only small communities can feel safe, where danger seems like something that belongs to the outside world. One day, the girl went to visit her grandmother. Her grandma lived very close by, barely 100 meters from her parents' house. It wasn't a long walk at all. It was the sort of distance you could cover in a minute or two, the kind of walk you don't even consider a journey. She left the house like she had done many times before. There was no reason to worry. No reason to think this would be different from any other day. Time passed, and she didn't come back. At first, her mother probably thought nothing of it. Maybe she stayed a little longer. Maybe they were talking. Or maybe she was helping her grandmother with something. Kids lose track of time. That's normal. But as more minutes passed, a quiet unease began to creep in. The kind of feeling that doesn't hit all at once, but slowly settles in your chest, making it harder to breathe. Her mother decided to go look for her. She stepped out into the street, expecting to see her daughter walking back home, maybe just around the corner. The street was quiet. Too quiet. She scanned the road, calling her name, listening for a response that didn't come. Then she saw something that made her heart drop. Her daughter's shoes were lying on the side of the road. Just the shoes, nothing else. That moment is hard to imagine without feeling sick. Shoes don't just come off on their own. They don't end up neatly abandoned without a reason. Her mother must have stood there frozen for a second, staring at them, her mind racing through explanations that made no sense and possibilities she didn't want to consider. She kept walking, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Panic had fully taken hold now, pushing her forward. A few steps further, she noticed something else on the asphalt. Blood. Not a puddle, not a splash, a trail, a thin, continuous trace that led away from the shoes and stretched down the road. It didn't stop after a few meters. It kept going, on and on, farther than seemed possible. The kind of sight that tells you immediately that something is terribly wrong, but doesn't yet tell you how bad it truly is. People joined in. Neighbors, family members, anyone who saw what was happening and understood that this was no longer a missing child, but something far worse. Together, they followed the trail, step by step, meter by meter. The further they went, the more unreal it felt. No one wanted to say what they were thinking out loud. The trail went on for kilometers. It felt endless. Eventually, it led them to a house. Outside the house, parked in the driveway, was an SUV. From a distance, it looked ordinary. Just another car in another yard. But as they got closer, the truth revealed itself in a way no one could have prepared for. The girl was there. She had been caught on the front of the vehicle after being hit. Her body had been dragged along the road for kilometers. She was no longer moving. The scene was beyond comprehension. What had started as a short walk to her grandmother's house had ended in a place so far from home, in a way so violent and senseless, that it shattered any sense of order or meaning. The driver was a woman. She had been taking medication that explicitly stated she was not supposed to drive while using it. She knew this. It was written clearly. But that day, she chose to ignore it. She wanted to go to the hairdresser, a normal errand, something people do without thinking. That decision, small and careless, would destroy multiple lives forever. According to her statement, she claimed she didn't realize she had hit a person. She said she thought she had run over a rock or some kind of object on the road. She continued driving, unaware or unwilling to understand that she had struck a child. Meanwhile, the girl was still alive for part of that time. She screamed. She tried to free herself. She hit the car in desperation, in pain, in terror. None of it stopped the driver. She kept going. The road carried them farther and farther away from the place where the girl had last been seen alive. The friction, the distance, the injuries were too much. The girl died from blood loss and multiple severe traumas long before the car finally stopped at the driver's home. What makes this story even harder to process is what happened next. The woman parked the SUV in her driveway and went inside her house. She didn't notice the body. Not when she parked. Not when she got out of the car. Not when she walked past the front of it. Only later did the reality of what had happened come fully into view, when others arrived and the truth could no longer be ignored. The entire village was shattered by what happened. A child had gone for a short visit to her grandmother and never came back. Her mother's last clear memory before everything changed forever was finding a pair of shoes on the roadside. That image alone is enough to haunt someone for a lifetime. People struggle to understand how something like this could happen, how someone could drive for kilometers with a person caught on their vehicle and not realize it, how medication, distraction, denial, or shock could combine in such a horrific way. There were investigations, court proceedings, arguments about responsibility, about awareness, about intent, but none of that could undo what had been done. No explanation could bring the girl back. No punishment could erase the suffering she endured or the pain her family was left with. In a small village, tragedies don't fade quickly. The road where it happened became a place people avoided or slowed down at instinctively. Parents held their children's hands tighter. Short walks no longer felt harmless. Every routine was suddenly fragile. Every small decision suddenly heavy with meaning. What makes this story so disturbing isn't just the violence of it, but the chain of ordinary choices that led to it. A child walking a familiar path. A driver ignoring medical advice. A moment of impact mistaken for something insignificant. A failure to stop, to check, to question. Each step alone might seem small, but together they created something irreversible. It's terrifying to realize how thin the line is between a normal day and a nightmare. How quickly safety can disappear. How one person's decision to ignore a rule can end another person's life in the most brutal way imaginable. Even now, years later, people still talk about it in low voices. Not out of curiosity, but out of disbelief. The kind that never really goes away. The kind that reminds you that tragedy doesn't always come from evil intent. Sometimes it comes from carelessness, denial, and the refusal to take responsibility in the moment when it matters most. That girl should have been home within minutes. Instead, her story ended kilometers away on a road that will never forget her, even if time tries to move on. And for everyone who knows what happened, that walk of 100 meters will never feel short again. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.